Imagine that you just created your app. You're so excited you're about to put it on the App Store, but you just don't know where to begin. How much does it cost? How do you deploy the app? All of those things. Well, we're going to go through the 5 things you should know before launching your app. And at the end, I'm going to even tell you, is it worth it? So let's go through the 5 things you're going to be learning today. Number one, we'll talk about the exact steps, how you can deploy the app. And for this, we're going to be looking at flutterflow. Every platform is a little bit different, but we're going to be looking at how to deploy it for flutterflow. Number two, we're going to look at the pricing. How much does it cost to actually deploy an app? Does it cost anything? What do you need to know? Number three, we're going to look at how much app stores actually take from you. Is it free? Do they take money from you? What's that all about? Number four, is it worth it? Should you actually launch your app? Number five, what would I do if I'm trying to launch my very own app? And what do we say to our students and clients? Okay, let's go through the steps. How can you actually deploy an application? Well, we're focused on Flutterflow today, but it's important no matter what no-code platform you have or want to use to deploy to the store, you need to see, is it even possible? For Flutterflow, you can create native applications that you can launch to the App Store, so you can do this. The App Store deployment, there's step-by-step guides, and it will take you close to about 45 minutes to an hour to go through all of these things. But there are important things you need to do even before getting to this point, and that's why it's important that we're kind of talking about all of these things right now. So here are the steps. Number one, you need to actually have developer accounts to be able to even put them on the App Store. So you need to have a developer account for Apple, so the Apple Store, and for the Play Store, the Google Play Store. You need to create accounts for them, and you need to pay for them. So that comes down to part two. How much does it cost to even launch an application? So even if you go for the free plan of Flutterflow before you go to the paid one, and by the way, if you go to Flutterflow and you want an app to go to the App Store, you need to have it go to the Pro plan to be able to do this. And we'll talk about the one-click deployment. That's kind of misleading. You technically click one button, but you got to do a lot of things beforehand. But yes, you can go Pro and it's $70. If you decide not to use Flutterflow after you deploy it, you can take your code and leave, right? So it would cost you at least $70 if you're going to be using something like Flutterflow. That's the beginning. But also, if I'm going to launch it on Apple devices and Android, Apple Apple charges you $99 per year to have a developer license. Just bottom line. So it's $99 for an enterprise program. It's $299 for the most part, $99 to get in. Now that's $99 plus if you're going to be doing a Play Store, so Google Play Store, they're going to charge you one-time fee of $25. So right there, it's all in at what is that price? 124. We're at $124 just right off the bat, just getting our license to be able to deploy something. Then we're going to decide if we're going to use something like Flutterflow. At least for 1 month, we would need $70, right? So right there, we have 124 plus 70. My math is kind of bad, but that's 194. So we're basically at $200 before we're even at the gate, before it's even on there. That's something to consider. Do you have the money? What's going on? Are you taking a loan? Are you, factoring that in? How much are you charging for your application? That's another thing. If you're charging $200, $150, depending on what application you're charging for, okay, it might recoup the cost. And for the flip side, if people say there's no way people would pay $195 for an app, depends on the functionality and depends on the industry. If you're in education, there are some apps that cost that much. If you're in health, there could be apps that cost that much. It really depends. Not only that, depends on if you're charging in-app purchases. But if you make money for in-app purchases for the users to actually pay you, do you make all the money? That's a great question. Depending on what platform you're using and everything like that, there's going to be a certain amount that the platform is going to take from you. For example, Apple takes 30% of all transactions for in-app purchases, or 15 or 30% for subscriptions. Depends on the length and everything like that. But let's just bottom line, let's look at 30% for in-app purchases. So why is that a big deal? Well, you have to factor in your pricing because 30% is going to go to the store. Is that fair? Well, there's tons of litigation about that. Unreal. So the people that made Fortnite tried to sue Apple a couple years about it and they lost and they're still ongoing. The bottom line is it's pay to play. If you decide to go on to the App Store, you will be charged $30. In a second, we'll talk about there's ways around it. It's just what companies do. But just keep in mind, if they're paying for it and if they're downloading your app from the App Store and they decide to pay you through the App Store, they're taking 30%. But you might say, wait, what about the Google Play Store? What will the Play Store take from you? Well, again, they're taking 30%. Depends on subscriptions. There's going to be a couple other things to consider, but just look at the numbers 30 and 30. Okay. So why are we having this discussion? A lot of times when people decide to build an app, they don't know those things up front. They don't know how much they're going to be, how much is taken from them. They don't know the startup costs, and those are things to consider and decide. Do you even want a application in the App Store right away? That's something to consider. Now, like I said a few moments ago, I said, well, that's one way. How can you get around the in-app purchases? Well, this isn't the sneaky way. This is just what companies do, and this is legal. If you have a web version or if they're going to a website and they buy from you a subscription, now you're just paying payment processing or whatever you're using for the payment gateway. So if you're using Stripe, it's going to be 2.9% plus 30 cents. Again, make sure you're looking at the location that you're at in the world, if you can use Stripe or what payment processor you're using. But in general, instead of paying the 30%, you're going to look at the pricing and see if you can use this payment processor in the location of whatever country you're in, but look at what the rate is, right? This is 2.9 plus 30 cents per transaction. So it's 2.9% every single time you charge someone plus 30 cents on top of that. So those are some numbers to consider, how much you're going to be charging, what's going on with your pricing. Now, if you have a free app, remember 30%, you're not charging anything. You're clear. You just have to think about how much it is for startup costs, the initial developer fee, and if you're using Flutterflow or something like that. But that's something to consider. So a lot of people might encourage people to buy on their website and then they get a app as a bonus. So then they just sign in and it's connected to your account. And there's tons of videos to talking about that, but they're signing in and now you're not getting charged 30% every time there's a transaction. That's a way around it. That's one way. But this goes into the fact of, is it worth it? What is it worth it for you? Let's talk about you first. Is it worth it? It depends. Depends on how much money you're trying to make. What kind of app are you doing? Is it for internal apps? So if you're doing this for an enterprise company, do they even need to have the app on the App Store? That's something. If for you, for your own personal business, do you need to have an application that's on the App Store? Why or why not? Have you proven that your audience will download the app and continually use it? There are tons of times people are just using a mobilized or optimized web experience and they don't download it. A lot of people, there's tons of stats showing less people are downloading apps. So could you just send them to a optimized website that acts very similar to a application and that's good enough for them? That's something to consider for your audience. But those are things you should be doing before you decide, I'm just going to deploy to the app store, because tons of people also have this conception, if it's in the App Store, I'll automatically make money or people will find me. Not so. There are thousands of people a day that are submitting their app to the app stores and you can get buried. So unless you have a really good strategy of your organic audience to rate your app, talk about it, download it, and have influencers talk about it, you might not be showcased in your category in the App Store. Or if you go the ads route, you have to look at the return on investment. How much ad dollars are you spending for people to even download your app? Do you have the money for that? P.S. I would say don't go the ad route, go the organic route if you even decide to launch an app in the App Store. Which brings us to point number 5. What would I do? Would I decide to launch an app in the App Store? And the answer is, It depends. It really depends what kind of business I'm running. And no matter what business I decide to run, I would be using an app version, especially with flutterflow. I would be using the web version first to really make sure that I'm hearing my audience, understanding what I need to do before I even launch it in the app store. And I'm all about profitability. It has to make money, it has to be make sense for my audience to purchase this. So that would what would that look like? Number one, we'd have to hit a certain amount of money that the application is making, that people are purchasing in the app? Or is it such a great bonus that when people are buying my either community or an info product, that now I have an app component that it drives sales up because I have an app? I need to have data to decide to deploy it to the app store. So that's what I would say to you. Look at the data. What's going on? Is it feasible right now? Does it make financial sense? And then decide what you're going to do. Doesn't matter if you're going to be launching a free app or not. It's got to make clear business sense before you just spend your time and energy learning how to launch and do all of those things. Now, if people want to know some of the nitty gritty of some of the things that we've seen with past students, what you need to have so you don't get denied when you submit your application, if you want that, there'll be a link down below for this document to see all of the things. And if you want me to do a video about it, and there's a lot of demand, maybe we'll do that in the future. But I think it's important to think about all these things you should do or think about before launching your application or deploying your app in the App Store.